Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome back to the Black Pants Legion reaction and more Text Talks Battletech, and this is the Tripitz affair. So I know it's been a while since I last reacted to something from Tex here, but I mean, God, I'm so happy I can finally get into this, because the last one, like the Battle of Turkeyat, where they, where I finally learned how, they stopped the clans by essentially just destroying, by using their own culture against them. Just, I still, think about it sometimes, just by, how, again, I say it a lot, but just how nuts it is. So yeah, the Tripitz affair. I mean, this one isn't talking about it being, a holiday or anything. A Tripitz affair, that seems much more political, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And just by doing a quick glance into the description, it's described as one of the small hidden stories of Battletech. So I'm wondering if it's going to be one of those things that was from the outside, it looked to be that big of a deal, but it had unintended consequences that kind of rippled out throughout the universe in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say on this, so let's, get this thing started. So of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because my main goal for this year is to hopefully hit 5,000 subscribers, and at the current rate I'm going, that's totally doable thanks to every one of you that thinks my channel is worth subscribing to. Yeah, but with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Alright everyone, sit down and shut up. This lecture is going to be a little different. I'm Mr. Tex, this is Tex Talks Battletech, and this time around, rather than tell a story about a mech, I'm going to tell a story about a ship. A slice of its history, its importance, and in the end, its ultimate demise.
Ultimate demise? Oh, a ghost ship?
This story...
Oh, Tripitz. Is this going to be named after the battleship? Huh. Okay, interesting. I wonder how that's going to play into things. Wait, ghost ship? Is it going to... Wait, if it's named after Tripitz, is this thing going to be more... Is this whole thing going to be more like, the Bismarck then? Is that how this is going to work?
Like so many others, starts somewhere in the middle. And to provide as much context as I can, there may be a tangent or two. By the end, I will tie these threads together, so worry not. The tale this time around is a periphery folklore story. The periphery being the periphery. Well, you have to take these stories with a grain of salt. I mean, deep space has long held enough rumor and hearsay to fill many volumes of written work.
Express.
And spacers are, well, by and large traveling vagabonds prone to drinking their pay and telling extremely tall tales. That being said, the full story goes like this. Once upon a time in the late 30th century, the Taurian Concordat found an ancient, derelict Star League-era warship floating seemingly abandoned in deep space. The vessel in question was a Black Lion-class battlecruiser. At 802,000 tons mass, and boasting enough advanced weaponry that even the clans themselves would later claim them as flagships post-Exodus, the Black Lion class was an enormously powerful weapons platform for any who had ambitions of galactic force projection.
Oh. Okay. I was wondering, okay, so is this going to be one of the... So this was... from before Star League. Oh, so given that this is a folk tale, I'm going to guess, either one of two things happens. Either one, the ship is sentient with an advanced AI or something, and that's why, ghost ship. Or two, somebody steals it and starts doing a lot of stuff, but then, like a ghost ship, is able to disappear before they're caught.
Untouched save for the ravages of time, it was a unique and truly awesome engine of war waiting for any who could claim it. Something this powerful was obviously a fundamental force multiplier for regional political balance, as it was indeed a true relic of humanity's golden age, and naturally a unique opportunity for any power block of the era. And yet, on the verge of its recovery by the Taurians, mysteriously, from nowhere, unknown forces arrived to annihilate it completely, before disappearing just as suddenly as they had arrived.
Oh!
Unlike some other periphery stories and folklore,
What is
this
that?
story is entirely grounded in truth.
Okay, so I'm gonna guess, no giant space monsters, but somebody just snuck in and destroyed the ship before somebody else could take it? Why?
What information I have suggests its destruction was rooted in the cold, hard calculations of an organization keen on maintaining the balance of power. This entire series of events encompasses what will later be called the Tripitz affair.
Oh, okay. I did an oopsie and didn't actually read the title. Oh god, okay, that's embarrassing. I seem to remember doing this. I seem to be doing this a lot, specifically when it comes to Battletech. I don't know why.
The story of the SLS Tripitz is not a simple one, and to fully understand why it was first abandoned in deep space, and then lost to time, and lastly destroyed, we have to dive into history. For once upon a time, warships were fairly common. Once upon a time, they defined warfare in the inner sphere. But, as with all things in the inner sphere, things eventually trend toward betrayal, tears, and misery.
God, okay, so wait, so it used to be, and then it devolved towards, the mech okay.
As you no doubt have gathered, warships were a very big deal. From the beginning of humanity's push outward, there were warships. When humanity fought, the first line was warships. When humanity invaded, it was spearheaded by warships. Every blockade, every major battle, every war, big and small, involved the simple arithmetic of how many warships you had, and how could you counter the enemy's fleet. Before the fall of Starleague, war planning's often first and only consideration was where was the fleet and how soon could it move. Each and every house, each and every nation-state, each and every two-bit warlord either bought, built, operated, stole, or dreamed of warships, because force projection simply was impossible without them. Notice I said was. We shall get to that. So why were warships so important? Why were they so significant? Well, let's say you're a neo-feudal society with an enormously wealthy ruling class, and some of your people get a bit uppity because you rely upon their hard labor to keep your economy moving. Nothing says get back to work like casually glassing a city or two. Nothing at all has that awesome, righteous display of awe-inspiring power that a warship does.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that would work. I mean, granted, glassing an entire city, I can't help but feel, granted, you are talking about planetary scale here, but I can't help but feel that that would almost be the equivalent of, a country, this area is starting to get really uppity. Let's nuke one of our own cities. Granted, if you're dealing with an entire city-wide, or maybe even planet-wide rebellion, or, at least, tension and threat of rebellion, yeah, maybe that could be, but you'd also be losing a lot of your own resources doing that.
And as for warfighting capabilities, nothing held a candle to warships. They were fully FTL-capable vessels, meaning they didn't have to rely on jump ships to be ferried to and from conflict zones. They could just suddenly, and very inconveniently, show up to ruin your territorial ambitions. As for force projection potential, larger warships could and often did carry full fighter wings, transports, and sufficient ground forces to ruin just about anyone's day. With a second-to-none communications and control system, a warship could effectively direct and through its weapons support a planetary invasion. It is no exaggeration to say that warships are what first enabled rapid, efficient warfighting, decisive tactical campaigning, absolutely effective counterinsurgency support, and served as the linchpin of every great house's power structure and arsenal.
Okay, I'm so confused right now because he keeps saying was. So, like, what happened to make it so that having, actual fleets of warships became not required anymore? Because from the little I do know of Battletech and mechwarrior, I know they don't have, like, teleportation. At least I don't think they do. And so, like, what made, having, interstellar navies that can, blockade planets and, like, rain death down from above, like, what made that, like, what rendered that obsolete? I mean, it's not like we're talking about, like, the transition from battleship to carrier. Like, this is seemingly just, warships became not as big of a thing anymore. Like, why?
It can be argued that without warships, the great houses would not be the size they are today, as they could not have conquered and then defended their holdings. Warships were power projection. Warships were the absolute maximal force brought into any conflict. They silenced rebellion by mere presence. They were often the first to fight and the last to leave. Again, past tense. We'll get to that.
I very much want you to
understand that building warships was the dreadnought rush of its time. Everyone made them. Hegemony and how shipyards turned them out alongside jump ships, as they were ultimately just another business product in that golden era. Every time the periphery threatened insurrection, the SLDF made warships and authorized an ever-expanding naval budget for peacekeeping purposes. Even great houses and periphery powers were keen to lay hands on what was the greatest weapon of its time. But if history has taught us anything, it's that arms races generally don't end well.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
After
people
the
in the
Amaris
Stone Age.
coup and the civil war which followed in its wake, the bulk of the remnant SLDF committed itself to an exodus under the leadership of General Kerensky. With them, they took 1,349 jump ships and 402 warships, intent on leaving the Inner Sphere and the impending succession wars far, far behind. After the horrendous losses inflicted on the SLDF by the Amaris Civil War campaign, this was but a fractional remnant of Starleague's defensive force. However, it must be noted that for the record, each of the great houses also had their own militaries, and often those militaries were, in some part, patterned off the SLDF in terms of equipment, its use, and doctrine.
Yeah?
As Kerensky had feared, some of the SLDF had elected to join house militaries or sell their services and become roving mercenaries. All of this awe-inspiring firepower, coupled with ambitious house leadership and the dangerous power vacuum in the wake of Starleague's collapse, resulted in a series of wars truly apocalyptic in scale. The secession wars were fought without much, if any, restraint. Among all the other numerous casualties, by the Second Secession War, warships were thought to be completely extinct. One by one, they were destroyed in the great battles of that era. One by one, they were consumed in the fires of war through aggressive campaigns, poor maintenance, lack of spares, lack of repair facilities, and eventual lack of functional working knowledge on their systems of operation. Yes, in the end, the fires of war had even claimed knowledge as a victim.
Oh, okay. So that's why you don't see them around anymore. It's not so much a fact that, they became obsolete. They're just so resource intensive, to maintain, that the houses nowadays don't have the know-how or, the facilities to even facilitate repairing and maintaining something like this, or let alone building new ones. Jeez, that is sad.
Their last major presence in the Inner Sphere was the Battle of Hesperus II, wherein they were thought to be lost each and every one through direct action or embarrassingly catastrophic FTL malfunctions.
Oh, well, that doesn't sound
You
good.
have to understand that during the Secession Wars, the technology base suffered horribly. Each house was keen to conquer what they could and destroy what they couldn't keep. Entire planets were razed. Entire populations were deleted. Generations of research and development were destroyed by enemies trying to deny their opponents any advantage. This was, to the best of their abilities, the great houses' attempt at total supremacy. This was accomplished through a robust application of total war theory, and over the course of Secession Wars, humanity lost the ability to continue their ancestors' work, and in many cases they struggled to barely maintain it. By the end of the Secession Wars, the Inner Sphere was a graveyard on a scale known only to the gods. It is no wonder that the Inner Sphere lost much more than peace. They'd ruined nearly every major technological advance they had made. Through their territorial ambitions and avarice, the great houses of the Inner Sphere had burned everything they inherited for the dream of controlling it all. Sadly, as it turns out, when all the rules of war go out the window, it's quite possible to bomb people into the Stone Age.
God, it reminds me of, the saying from Fallout, war never changes. I mean, war, when you get down to it, it's always a loss game. You're always expending resources to gain something, but you always lose more than you gain. Or you always lose something in the process. And looking at it, I can't remember which mech it was specifically I've watched before, but I talked about, how they're essentially using the same designs for literal centuries with not very much, development in new designs. I mean, they create new patterns where different combinations of weapons and, equipment and stuff like that. But it's very much, it's the constant warfare just has seemingly caused, human civilization for the most part to just stagnate. And then you have, the clans where, yeah, they started off, the greater tech, and yet even they came in with all this, super advanced tech, but, I guess the isolation away from, greater human civilization, as well as just the culture that developed, where it's they were the inheritors of human space and the inner sphere and stuff like that. Just another form of erosion. God, I mean, I watch a lot of these super far future sci-fi settings where they get really depressing up to a point, because you just going to 40K, where humanity, human civilization, that isn't it's not even maintaining. It's very, very slowly just dying and decaying. Granted, I love the tech and the cool concepts you can play with, but at the same time, some of these are just so depressing. I love it and hate it at the same time.
The loss of technology from this universal campaign of indiscriminate warfighting had other effects. The loss of warships meant that campaigning became a tedious, difficult venture. Houses had to now muster forces without the protection or force projection capabilities that warships afforded. Houses had to heavily garrison their worlds to prevent losing territory and resources to piracy, insurrection, revolt, or border skirmishing. Houses had to play careful defensive games, making war a slow, deliberate exercise in comparison to the blitzkrieg efforts of yesteryear.
I mean, I suppose, doing it slow and methodically could be better than, going fast, but at the same time, if you're going slow, that also means you're spending more time in a place, which means more fighting is happening in that place, which means that place inevitably gets more destroyed. So I'm listening to this, and all I'm hearing is feedback loop, feedback loop, feedback loop, feedback loop. It's I'm not liking any of this. I do not like this time and this space and time.
The great houses were reduced to a simmering cold war that occasionally flared into conflict before settling into a slog and then an eventual, if uneasy, peace. The slow nature of this conflict taught all the great houses to be wary of ambitious ventures, aggressive posturing, and going all in on any one strategy. Through this backslide into a more primitive technology base.
More primitive, quote unquote. I mean, they still have, multi-story tall battle robots and the ability to go, in FTL. But, it's all about what you know.
A precarious balance was maintained. No longer did the great houses have the power to make unilateral war against their neighbors, or control substantially more territory than they already had. The loss in technology kept them more or less in check. To gamble on ambitious conquest could result in calamity, and so all sides learned to play the great game, making moves carefully. Disinformation, propaganda, and careful allocation of forces became the standard. Wars were now over a dozen systems, not hundreds. The secession wars had strangely made the great houses closer to equals than ever before.
I suppose that's,
And you have
one
to
good
understand,
thing.
there are some people who are very interested in maintaining that delicate balance at any cost for their personal benefit alone. So, walk with me a moment here. A moment into crazy land. Here's the thing. We're going to have to acknowledge at this moment that the Unisphere has two histories. Two parallel histories.
Oh god. We're getting into secret society territory here. Oh no. Oh no.
There is, of course, the official history, which most everyone knows an interpretation of. Each and every citizen of the sphere and periphery alike has their own view of history, which makes their government look great and others look bad, and so on.
Yeah, as you
Then
do.
there's the shadow history. This is the ultimate what really happened account of events, and is more or less an endless chain of shadow wars, grand conspiracies, assassinations, proxy battles, spies, lies, meddling, and madness. All moves in the great game of galactic politic is in the shadow history. So, put on your tinfoil hats now, boys and girls. We're gonna open the pages of the crazy book and delve into what really happened with the Tripitz affair. The whole story, not just the folklore. So firstly, we have to talk about how Comstar is more or less the root and cause of many problems in the inner sphere.
Of course.
Comstar controls all communication in the inner sphere, period. Comstar controls all banking, being that the C-bill everyone is paid in is backed by Comstar's communication services.
Oh, that's what the C-bill stands for. I didn't know they were... Okay. I'd always assumed C-bill was just, slang for, future money being so... devalued, where what originally was $1,000 in today's money in the far future is one C-bill, or something like that. I didn't do C-bill. Yeah, I guess that does make sense. C-bill, Comstar. Okay.
Everyone takes C-bills because H-bills or house bills are largely tied to how sane their government is at the time, and considering that the answer to that question is usually between almost and never, C-bills are always the more attractive option. By the way, before you ask, the current exchange rate from a single C-bill to modern US dollars is between $8 and $10.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I would. Well, okay. More valuable, but not as much as I thought. Interesting.
To the C-bill. In case any of you nuts want to say, but the numbers for a mech cost isn't high enough. Yes it is, because that number is in Spacebox or C-bills. Tangent aside, let's get down to the hard facts. Who owns the actual monetary unit of exchange and facilitates its use throughout all commerce? Comstar. Who runs the Mercenary Review Board, which is the only reasonable and reliable way to hire mercenaries, rate their services, and ensure you don't get ripped off? Comstar. Who listens to all communications traffic and probably reads every message? Comstar. What about reports of unexplained phenomena, especially those which target technological discoveries or rediscoveries? Comstar. What about reports of people, mostly scientists and free thinkers, disappearing for no good reason, often after announcing they made a breakthrough? Comstar. What about reports of people dying suddenly of very completely natural diseases that were totally undiagnosed up to that point? Comstar. Because, well, Comstar sees all, does all. Find the clans before they found us? Well, Comstar also did that. Kind of. That's a complex one.
Wait, they discovered the clans were coming and they didn't tell anybody? Okay, that's... Okay.
I'll save that gem for another day, but boy, did they screw up. I'll be honest, they're kind of to blame for the clan invasion, and as a matter of fact, the way things played out. But just remember, when in doubt, Comstar did it.
Okay.
And before people start to scream tangent, let's stitch this back into the fabric of the main narrative. Who do you suppose maintains a hidden, massive stockpile of weapons from humanity's golden age and ensures no one else can rival their primacy or upset the balance of power to the inner sphere? A stockpile so massive it contains a small fleet of very active warships, to include battleships capable of eradicating entire civilizations in an afternoon of idle button pushing. Well, Comstar. And you see, in 2979, Comstar had a big problem. By 2979, as you now know, most warships were officially considered extinct. All data suggests that they were wrecked, gone, lost, missing, or rendered so crippled as to be completely ineffective. All known examples were rendered into fleets in being or totally ineffective and inoperative. By 2979, Comstar was beginning to relax because after endless indecisive conflict, none of the great houses really had the power to wreck each other significantly further.
So, okay, now I'm starting to see where this is going. Actually now, where the Tripitz was discovered, a near pristine Golden Age warship. Yeah, Comstar definitely wouldn't want something like that running around, that whoever grabs it might, start making trouble again. Especially if it has nothing to really actually to threaten it.
Sure, they could always load up a bunch of their precious jump ships with drop ships galore and invade a planet, but without warships, or rather, without the ability to totally control a battle space with a warship, the blitzkrieg of yesteryear, the glassing of planets, the massive excesses of violence from the collapse of Starleak were finally dying down. By 2979, warfare had turned into a series of endless border skirmishes, petty wars over planets rather than whole sectors, as no one was willing to risk further damage to dwindling examples of what was in many cases irreplaceable technology. Under these conditions, the status quo was maintainable, so long as the great houses maintained parity and balance. Balance further maintained by Comstar when someone did something they shouldn't, like try to rediscover lost technology or form overly ambitious plans. Balance was easy to maintain so long as none of the great houses achieved any form of lasting advantage.
So that either means, like, snuffing out anything that, any individual person creates, or maybe making it so that advantage doesn't last that very long and gets spread out between all the others. Okay. Yeah, okay.
And in 2979, that balance was threatened significantly. In 2979, the Taurian Concordat had found the SLS Tripitz. Something that could potentially change everything.
Dark side of the moon.
Abandoned and adrift, and mostly intact, was the SLS Tripitz, a Black Lion-class battlecruiser from the Starleague Defense Force. How it got there, why it was there, no one knew for the longest time. But, again, thanks to Comstar, the story has even more layers. Please indulge in a minor tangent here, because I think you'll find this only adds to the narrative and mystery. Sometime after the events of this story, a Comstar operative going by the handle Damocles provided documents to an investigative reporter about a great number of interesting things, one of which being the complete recovered diary of Colonel Hannes Schmidt, who was the last commanding officer of the legendary Black Watch, an SLDF unit responsible for the protection and safeguarding of Starleague's First Lord and his immediate family.
Yeah, I remember all about them. God, those legends.
In the pages of the diary, a story emerges from the dark days of Starleague's collapse, detailing the supposed escape of one of the last members of House Cameron, fleeing the massacre at the Unity Palace. During this escape, the Colossus-class dropship SLS Abyss made emergency orbital rendezvous with a waiting warship on the dark side of the moon. And that warship was the SLS Tripitz. It is suggested that this vessel carried the last of the currently presumed dead Cameron bloodline far, far, far away from the solar system. Far away from the cause and the chaos of the conflict. How it came to be abandoned, derelict, and forgotten so far from home is ultimately unknown. But there it was, free for the taking. While the Taurians did not care for its history, they knew its value. The Taurians had stumbled onto something huge and immediately made efforts to recover it at all costs. If this ship were to be recovered, if it were put back into service, this would be like letting the Bismarck loose in a world of ironclads. Needless to say, this would cause a significant imbalance, and this was not good for Comstar.
Yeah, okay, now I'm starting to see why, they destroyed it. But now I'm also wondering, like, given that, it's old Starleague tech, why didn't they, make moves to try to secure it themselves? I mean, with all things, like, if they know about the communications, couldn't they, you think they could have played things slightly differently?
Needless to say, if someone figured out how to reverse engineer even pieces of this vessel, the balance would be upset. Also, being that something this huge couldn't be kept under wraps, it was soon learned that the Capellan Confederation wanted to recover it for their own purposes, and well, as soon as any intelligence agency in the Inner Sphere knows anything, Comstar knows everything.
Okay, yeah, okay, okay. Question was answered, thank you, text.
As you may have gathered, other than controlling the money and having a second-to-none intelligence-gathering instrument, you may remember Comstar has firm control over all communication. So unless the great houses are willing to pony express all messages around their empire at all times, never enter it into any computer system at any time, and rely on memorized messages only, they're going to have to interact with Comstar in one way or another. Naturally, when Comstar found out about this ship, they decided that maybe it would be best if nobody got the Tripitz. Comstar Primus Yin Takami immediately dispatched the 1st Division of the Comstar Guards and Militia under strict orders that none should take the Tripitz. Also, they were given strict orders that they should not, under any circumstances, allow themselves to be identified, and thus painted every piece of equipment they had stark white. Because I guess that's what you do when you're Comstar. Be weird. And, of course, sanitize assets for plausible deniability operations where they shouldn't be operating.
Yeah, okay, the second part I could definitely see. I mean, again, sending in special operatives, completely making sure that they're indistinguishable. I mean, hopefully. God, yeah, this is, very shadow government-esque. Of course, it's the religious weirdos that worship the phone company.
Did I mention they started a technobabble religion? Robes and all. Wizard spacemen. Anyways, Needless to say, when the Taurian recovery teams...
God, you know, I was gonna say this, I really do love when you have, like, these sci-fi settings that just have, like, certain elements in them, certain, like, big elements in them that are just so... they wouldn't, you don't think they would work. Like, the classic being 40k, super advanced, like 40,000 years in the future. And yet, it's a feudalistic society, like, no AI, like, any advanced machine is, like, controlled by, like, lobotomized human beings or stuff like that. Fighting against literal gods, and their FTL travel goes through hell. And then, you know, another setting I've been watching lore videos on, Lancer. And I described it in, you know, one of my videos as, like, a strange mix of, like, Star Trek and Borderlands, in the way that you have, like, you know, Star Trek worlds and Borderlands-like worlds, you know, in the same universe. And yet, on top of that, you also have, you know, eldritch space math AI gods, or AI god, that just appeared one day due to a paradox in a super advanced computer system, and then it's like its crumbs or its children were left behind, and now humanity uses those instead of AIs. And then, you know, here we have, you know, Battletech. Again, a sort of, like, sci-fi universe far in the future with, like, feudalistic governments and stuff like that in control. Yet, this time, all warfare is basically done using giant multi-story mechs, and the phone company is both a cult and the shadow government. God, honestly, I love the weirdness. It is just... it's perfect. It's one of those things where, like, I dislike, especially with, like, what's been happening with some of the things in 40k, where, like, you have people that say, like, oh, it should be for everybody, and they try to change things in the setting to do so. And yet, when you make something for everybody, you just make it into, like a sort of, like, gray, homogenous thing that's for nobody, really. It's the weirdness that pulls you in.
Suddenly found themselves to not be alone. Naturally, they were a bit startled. Nobody was supposed to know the ship was here. For someone to jump on top of them out of nowhere was a bit scary, to say the least. When the mysterious jump ship appeared without marking, signals, beacons, greetings, or explanation, the Taurians were unsettled. Naturally, the Taurian forces immediately sent forth 4 lances of their best aerospace fighters to intercept and identify the newcomers pouring from an unknown, unregistered, unidentified jump ship. Comstar's unknown forces annihilated them and proceeded to bomb and strafe the Tripitz into a useless hulk, leaving it tumbling into a rapidly decaying orbit. Afterwards, the surviving Taurian recovery teams issued a statement indicating that the reason they had lost the super-secret, totally awesome Starleague ship was because a bunch of unknown, completely white ships devoid of any insignia attacked from nowhere, before returning to nowhere, for no reason given, in an attack that nobody claimed responsibility for.
Okay, now I'm starting to see where the ghost ship portion of this comes from. Okay, I originally thought it was going to be the Tripitz, but no, it was the people attacking the Tripitz.
Naturally, this sort of explanation is the thing that starts legends and rumor. And so we have the foundation of one of the many Battletech legends. Most would later suggest this story was a corrupted retelling based on half-truths or just plain old periphery folklore. Some surmised this was the cover story for a partial or total recovery of the Tripitz. Others would suggest it wasn't unknowns, but Capellans that struck the vessel. The story lives on as the Vandenberg White Wings, which as a tall tale sits on the shelf between the so-called Minnesota tribe and the disappearing battleship of Merope. All fine stories shrouded in the classified...
Wait, disappearing battleship of Merope? What? Oh, it's okay, this is specifically about Battletech. Okay. I thought that was just, okay. I thought that was like real world mythology, and it's like, I'd never heard of that before.
Hidden or shadow history of 31st century combat. So that more or less ends this episode. I want to go over a few thank yous before we proceed to do whatever stupid we have cooked up for the credits, which some of you watch. Firstly, thank you for indulging my tangents. I think
again, it was a really good video.
And support the narrative in this sort of complex, layered history. Secondly, thanks to Sarna.net for being the best fan-driven wiki you will ever find. If you think Wikipedia is better, remember that midichlorians are canon. I'll just let that sink in. The reason someone's a big bad Sith or Jedi is because of bacteria, or whatever. Now that you're dead inside, let's move on.
I mean, granted, again, I'm just gonna... I remember it was explained to me, midichlorians aren't so much more like a bacteria, they're more like the Force equivalent to the mitochondria, where, like, oh, you know, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and some people just have a lot more midichlorians, which makes them better in the Force somehow. I don't know. Again, I'm not a big Star Wars guy.
If you're interested in reading about the setting of Battletech, I'd recommend you go to Sarna. It's an awesome wiki. Lastly, I want to thank my fans, both new and the long term. You have a lot of choices and content in this day and age where we're oversaturated, to say the least. So thanks for watching this instead of, say, a top 10 list about the Imperium's worst taco stands or top Warhammer 40k hats. I want to do my best to not just read verbatim from a wiki or any other shortcuts. I want to actually do the research this setting deserves, and try not to show contempt for it or my audience. Thank you. I mean, there's worse stuff out there. Ugh. Sometimes I wish the internet wasn't real. And yeah, that should do it.
Okay, let's see.
I found the remote.
Oh, God.
Oh God, this cartoon.
Taking arms against a trueborn warrior? Obliterate this place.
Yes, this is a typewriter. Back in the 21st...
Honestly, if I could find that somewhere, I'm kind of contemplating wanting to do a reaction to that old series. I just have no idea how dangerous that would be for the actual, you know, for my channel, you know, for copyright strikes and stuff like that.
century, poorly educated social deviants known as hipsters used to compose banal, mediocre manuscripts upon these and use them as a crude, haptic interface for a then brain-draining technology known as an iPhone while drinking purposefully cold coffee and or an IPA.
Wow, that sounds terrible. What's an IPA?
Well, imagine a beer that is exceptionally bitter and tastes exactly like farts.
Oh, how terrible. Why did they do that?
Well, you see, they wrote reviews about it and convinced each other that bad was good. They were also quite fond of decrying the excesses of capitalism or using expensive electronics assembled in third world countries by slave labor, or smoking expensive cigarettes in public places, or warning about the threat pollution poses to an ecosystem.
Oh, how horrible.
Oh yes, truly a dark age. They were fairly easy to spot as they wore women's jeans, flannel, and glasses without lenses in them.
What mad people? What became of them?
They all perished beneath their multiple layers of unnecessary irony.
Honestly, I am kind of happy that, you know, hipsters really aren't a thing anymore. At least they're not as widespread or, ironically, mainstream as they once were.
You and your wretched kind have come a long way to die. Your hubris will see you killed this day. Your machines and tactics are pathetic. I shall reave you from this place. I shall tear back your flesh and expose your quivering insides to the sky. For the glory of the clans, for honor's sake, in Kerensky's name, I shall have you. Oh no.
Achtung, Achtung! Alle Einheiten, sofortiger Statusbericht.
The scouting, oh
Ich habe
god.
ja dein Inventar aufgeklärt. Deine Kommunikation wurde soeben beendet. Hervorragende Aufklärung für deine Leistung. Bei dieser verdeckten Operation wirst du befördert. Ich habe den Feind aufgeklärt. Er ist sehr überrascht. Außerdem steht er in Flammen. Ich fahre mit der Aufklärungsoperation fort. Gegenwehr ist minimal.
Again, I love the fact, you know, it's a meme that, oh, they do scouting operations in these giant, in these giant mechs. Like, it's just so, I love it.
Deine Aufklärung ist beispielhaft.
Friedrich 3 hier. Ich kundschafte gerade in der Stadt, Sektor Bertha. Ich habe keine Bienen mehr im Cockpit, aber ich bin sehr beschäftigt. Es muss so viel ausgekundschaftet werden. Ich werde den ganzen Tag mit Erkundschaften zu tun haben.
Ich habe gerade das Kapitol aufgeklärt. Jetzt ist es ein Krater. Benötige Unterstützung zur Aufklärung des Raumhafens.
Das kann arrangiert werden.
Alright,
God,
instead
so
of
stupid.
normal
I
riffing
love
on the
it.
credits, I'm gonna answer a few things here for those.
Oh, God, honestly, beautiful. Again, like, I don't like shadow government storylines and things, mainly because, you know, it hits a little too close to home with how nuts everything is right now. But at the same time, I mean, you gotta love the fact, I mean, granted, I mean, destroying that, you know, that technology, like, it does hurt me for all the things that it could have done good, but at the same time, with how, like, just with the little bit of information I do know about, you know, all these houses, yeah, I can totally see, you know, keeping that tech out of their hands and keeping the current status quo around just for how much less violent it is than what it was. Yeah, I can definitely see where they're coming from with that. Ah, God, but yeah, that's definitely going to be it. So, yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.